She walked with a wooden crutch, her coat worn, her bouquet simple. No medals, no salute. A billionaire saw her and said, "This isn't your place." So she moved, silently. But then, someone saw the tag. Just a dog tag, metal, scratched, stamped with something no one was supposed to know. K7, black dust. And in that moment, an entire plane full of strangers stood, not because she asked, not because she spoke, but because they realized they had just told a ghost to sit in the back. Let's uncover the story of the woman who walked for the ones who never came home.
Veterans Day in America always carries a hush, a silence deeper than the absence of noise. It's the weight of memory, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't wave flags. It simply breathes, heavily. That was the feeling at LAX that cold November morning. Among the streams of travelers wheeling suitcases and sipping overpriced coffee, there was one figure who moved differently, slowly, deliberately, not because she was unsure where to go, but because every step she took cost her something. She walked with a wooden crutch, not the kind you buy off a shelf, but one carved, smoothed, and worn by time and pain. Tribal Yoruba patterns faded into the grain, not decoration, but identity. Her coat was long and charcoal-colored, heavy and worn. A camouflage scarf hung around her neck like a whisper of something she didn't talk about anymore. She wore no medals, no patch, no sign that said, "I served," but her boots, scuffed and silent, said it all. Her name was Nyasha Okoro. She was 42, born in Lagos, raised in Texas. Most people didn't look at her twice. They just saw the dreadlocks tied neatly back, the bouquet of white flowers in one hand, and assumed she was someone's aunt, maybe visiting a grave. They didn't see the dog tag under her scarf. They didn't know what it said. But one man at the TSA checkpoint glanced too long. A sergeant, retired. He opened his mouth and closed it. He saluted her, not with his hand, but with his eyes. She didn't return it. She just nodded, almost apologetically, and kept walking. Her boarding pass said first class, seat 2A. It was a free upgrade, offered quietly by the airline, flagged from a past "Thank you for your service" database. She hadn't asked for it, but she accepted. Not for comfort, not for pride, because she needed to reach Washington, D.C. without her knee giving out. She was headed to Arlington National Cemetery, not for ceremony, not to be seen, just to leave flowers where the world had long forgotten the names. The boarding call echoed softly. "Ascendair Flight 288 to Washington, D.C., now boarding Group 1. She stood, adjusted her scarf, gripped her crutch, and walked toward the gate. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The terminal wasn't hostile. It just looked past her. She passed a group of travelers in matching corporate blazers. They shifted to the side without making eye contact. A child stared at her crutch, then quickly looked away when Yasha smiled. She didn't blame them. They didn't know. The flight crew greeted her by name. She nodded, stepped into the jet bridge, and felt the hum of engines beneath her boots. She entered the first-class cabin quietly, moving down the narrow aisle between the immaculate seats, their leather creaking gently as passengers adjusted themselves. Seat 2A, window. She sat down without effort, but with the weariness of someone who'd done harder things. She placed the bouquet on her lap, folded her coat gently, adjusted her crutch by her leg, and looked out at the gray California morning. The flight hadn't even taken off, and already this day was heavy.
The first-class cabin had that familiar, sterile warmth, the kind that tried to feel premium but always landed somewhere between dentist's office and library.
polished beige panels, dim golden lighting from overhead, leather seats wide enough to forget the world, and people who paid to not be noticed. Nyasha stepped into it like she was stepping onto foreign soil. The shift from terminal to first class wasn't just a change in air pressure, it was social pressure too. The crutch tapped once against the narrow threshold, announcing her presence in a space where no one had asked for it. She didn't look around, but they did. The woman in 1C, high heels, hair like morning news anchors, glanced up and down Yasha's coat, her scarf, her boots. Her lips tightened but never moved. The man 2 rows behind paused his phone screen, tilted his head, whispered something to his companion. Yasha moved slowly, not out of hesitance but necessity. Her right leg moved steadily, controlled. The left, well, there was no left, only what came after. The prosthetic was concealed beneath the khaki pant leg, but the crutch told the story first. Her breath stayed slow. She kept her shoulders square. This was not the first time a room had paused for her. It wouldn't be the last. She reached seat 2A, window seat. She paused for just a second, as if bracing for something, not physical but psychological. Then sat down, not collapsed, sat with poise. She placed the bouquet of white flowers gently in her lap, the stems slightly damp against her coat. She adjusted the camouflage scarf at her neck, one corner of it pulled back slightly, just enough for the thin silver chain to slide forward, her dog tag. She caught it instinctively, tucked it back. No one noticed. Or so she thought. A little boy, maybe 6 or 7, peeked over the seat in front of her. His big brown eyes locked on the dog tag for a second too long. Nyasha smiled softly at him. He didn't smile back. He just turned to his mother and whispered something. The mother pulled him back into his seat without a word. Across the cabin, a tall man entered late, power in his walk, confidence in his smirk. He looked like the kind of person who expected people to recognize him, and often they did. Richard Wexler, tech mogul, political donor, owner of a private island and 3 media companies. He stopped mid-step when he saw her, not because he knew who she was, but because she didn't look like someone who belonged in first class. At least, not in his version of the world. He made a slight detour as he walked past her seat, glanced down, noticed the wooden crutch, smirked. Didn't say anything. Not yet. He sat in 2C, across the aisle. Nyasha didn't move. She looked out the window. The runway lights shimmered under overcast light. The hum of the plane's internal systems vibrated faintly through her boots. The attendant approached. "Can I get you settled in with a blanket or something to drink, Miss Okoro?" Nyasha turned and met her eyes. The attendant flinched, not out of fear, but something else. Recognition? Respect. Nyasha gave a small shake of her head. "Water, please." "Of course." Across the aisle, Richard leaned into his seat, already texting. His voice carried just enough for nearby passengers to hear. First class is getting real charitable these days. Nyasha heard it. Didn't move.
Didn't flinch. Her hand shifted slightly on the crutch, just once. The attendant returned with her water, set it down gently. "Let me know if you need anything." The plane doors closed. The chime sounded. The safety video began. Nyasha took a sip of water. The crutch leaned against her leg like an old friend. The bouquet remained untouched, and the silence in the cabin got a little heavier. It wasn't judgment that hurt. It was the familiarity of it. She had been in rooms like this before, rooms where being quiet made her invisible,
where medals didn't matter, where memories of loss were less important than expectations of appearance. She breathed in, breathed out. Somewhere deep in her coat pocket, her hand closed gently around the edge of a folded envelope. Inside, a printed program for the Veterans Day ceremony at Arlington. She hadn't decided whether she'd attend or just place the flowers and leave. She leaned her head back against the seat, closed her eyes. Outside, the engines roared softly. The plane began to roll. Somewhere behind her, passengers settled into dreams of meetings, deals, vacations. Nyasha, she just wanted to make it through this flight, without being seen any more than she had been. The plane had barely lifted off the runway when Richard Wexler broke the silence. He didn't turn toward her. That would have been too direct, too confrontational. No, people like him didn't throw punches. They made cuts with words sharpened by entitlement. From his seat in 2C, he adjusted his tie, cleared his throat with performative elegance, and spoke loud enough for anyone in rows 1 through 4 to hear. It used to mean something, sitting up here. A woman 1 row ahead glanced over her shoulder. A man in 1A frowned without turning. Richard continued, resting one manicured hand on his leather briefcase. Now it's like first class is just a raffle prize, charity seats, pity upgrades. The words weren't aimed, they were floated, like dropping gasoline and walking away before the spark. Nyasha didn't flinch. She kept her head turned toward the window, the gray clouds parting gently beneath the plane. Her hands rested calmly on her lap, one still holding the bouquet, the other gently touching the curved head of her wooden crutch. If she had blinked more than usual, no one noticed. The flight attendant standing near the galley did. She froze for half a breath, then stepped forward. "Mr. Wexler, can I bring you something to drink?" He smiled without looking up. "Sure, scotch, meat, and maybe check with the captain about our standards these days." The smile never reached his eyes. The attendant nodded stiffly and turned, jaw clenched. Across the aisle, Nyasha slowly turned her head, not to him, but forward, as if aligning her spine with her silence. Her eyes remained steady, unmoving. Her breathing, unchanged. This wasn't the first time someone assumed she didn't belong. But somehow, this one felt different. Maybe because she didn't care anymore. Or maybe because she did. She looked down at the bouquet. One petal had bruised at the edge. She brushed it lightly, almost absent-mindedly. In the seat behind Richard, a young man in his 20s turned down his headphones. His fingers hovered above his phone's camera, then lowered. He looked at Nyasha, then at Richard, then back again. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. And nothing was what hurt most. For 15 minutes, the cabin existed in uncomfortable stillness. Passengers read pages without absorbing them. Flight attendants moved like shadows. The hum of the engines grew louder than it needed to be. Richard sipped his scotch and looked smugly satisfied, not because he won, but because he expected no one to question him. Then, something small shifted. The little boy from economy class came forward with his father to use the first-class restroom. As they waited near Nyasha's row, the boy looked at her again, his eyes fixed on her wooden crutch, then up to her face. This time, he didn't look away. Nyasha saw him, smiled. The boy's father noticed. He gave Nyasha a respectful nod, eyes lowering to the bouquet and the dog tag peeking from under her scarf. The boy whispered, "Did you get hurt in a war?" It wasn't loud, it wasn't impolite, it was pure. Nyasha didn't speak. She just nodded once. The boy stared at her for a moment more, then stepped into the lavatory with his father. In 2C, Richard glanced over, scoffed quietly, and muttered under his breath, "Oh, come on, playing soldier now." That was when the young man in row 3, the one who had almost filmed her, finally spoke. Not loud, but clear. "Hey, enough." Richard turned, surprised. "Excuse me?" The young man met his gaze, firm, but respectful. "You've made your point, let it go."
Richard's eyes narrowed, but for once, he didn't reply. Instead, he looked forward and drank the rest of his scotch without another word. Nyasha remained still. She hadn't spoken a single sentence since boarding, and yet the weight in the cabin had shifted. For once, silence wasn't a sign of submission. It was strength, a refusal to justify her existence. She turned back to the window. The clouds had opened, and below them, a sliver of the Potomac River reflected light like silver thread on worn cloth.
It started with a whisper, not from a passenger, from the intercom, a soft ding overhead, followed by a short, hushed conversation between two flight attendants near the galley, something about managing optics, VIP sensitivity, and avoiding escalation. Nyasha didn't need to hear the full words. She'd heard that kind of language before. Military briefings, crisis containment. What mattered wasn't truth, it was control. The younger flight attendant, the one who had offered her water earlier, hesitated for several seconds, then turned down the aisle. Her eyes flickered with something like guilt. She crouched slightly next to Nyasha's seat, not kneeling. This wasn't reverence, but it wasn't disrespect either. It was protocol colliding with conscience. "Miss Okoro, would you mind moving to another seat? There's been concern?" Nyasha turned toward her, not fast, just enough to meet her eyes. She didn't ask why. She didn't say no. She simply waited. The silence between them stretched. The flight attendant swallowed. "I'm so sorry. I don't agree with it, but—" Nyasha raised a hand gently, not to stop her, but to say, "Enough. I understand." She nodded once. Her fingers adjusted the scarf at her neck, tucking her dog tag deep underneath. She reached for the bouquet, still fresh, still untouched, and rose slowly. The crutch landed on the carpeted floor with a soft but audible thunk. Then again and again, rhythmic, firm. She walked down the aisle of first class with no expression on her face. Not anger, not shame, just history in every step. Passengers pretended not to watch. The woman in 1C looked at her tray table. The man in 1A sipped his drink. Someone coughed, deliberately too loud. But everyone listened to that crutch. Wooden, worn, insistent. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Halfway down the aisle, a flower fell from her bouquet. She didn't stop to pick it up. Behind her, Richard Wexler reclined his seat slightly, muttering, "Better for everyone this way." The flight attendant didn't reply. Nyasha reached the front of economy class. The noise returned, soft conversations, snack wrappers, earbuds, only on the surface. She was escorted to a seat in the second-to-last row, near the window again. A middle seat was left open beside her. Whether out of accident or design, she didn't care. She sat, adjusted her crutch, set the bouquet down beside her, exhaled, and then, without thinking, reached into her coat. Her fingers found the dog tag, her name, her number, and one small engraving beneath it. K7, no one left. She stared at it. Not long, just enough to remember where she had once bled and where others never came back from. She let it top back against her chest. No one in economy recognized her. She looked like anyone else, a tired woman with a limp and a crutch and tired eyes. Some passengers glanced once, then returned to their screens. But the little boy again, he saw more. He looked back from row 24, his seat just ahead of hers. He saw the crutch, the bouquet, the weight, and for some reason this time, he didn't look away. Across the aisle, his father, the ex-military man in the bomber jacket, shifted. Something had clicked. He leaned forward slightly, trying to catch another glimpse of the tag around her neck, the markings,
the pattern. He froze. His hands, once steady, now trembled slightly as he reached for his phone, not to record, not to post, to confirm.
His eyes darted over the results. A single line in an archived military forum. K7 unit, lost in black dust. No survivors confirmed. Mission classified. And yet, right there, 10 feet away, sat a woman with a crutch carved in Yoruba, a bouquet of white flowers, and a tag that should have never seen daylight again. He leaned back slowly, stared at the back of her head, and whispered to no one, "She's real." In row 23, aisle seat, Marcus Clay, 48 years old, Army retiree, honorable discharge, 2 tours in Fallujah, hadn't intended to fly today. His flight was rebooked last minute. Gate change, wrong seat assignment. He hated window seats. And yet, here he was, directly across from her. He hadn't noticed at first. A woman with a crutch in the back of the plane didn't exactly raise alarms. But the boy beside him, his son Eli, had turned back, stared, then whispered, "Dad, I think she dropped this." Marcus looked down. In Eli's small palm was a silver dog tag, cold, scratched, etched. He took it, expecting a name and serial number. He saw that, but also something else. 3 letters, 3 numbers. K7, black dust. Time stopped. Marcus didn't blink, didn't breathe. His mind scanned back 15 years to a night in Kandahar, a briefing room, closed doors, an erased whiteboard before anyone left. Someone had whispered, "They're ghosts. They don't get names, just dust." He remembered the whispers. A unit deployed into classified territory. Mission never acknowledged. Every operative presumed KIA. Files scrubbed. Families told to let go. K7 wasn't real. Not in any way that mattered. But the dog tag in his hand, real, cold, heavy. And the woman in the seat by the window, she was alive. He looked up, slowly, stared at her. Naisha sat facing the window, bouquet still in lap. Her head bowed slightly, the crutch leaned against her right leg like a soldier at ease. Her scarf had slipped, and beneath it, against her dark bronze skin, another dog tag shimmered faintly. She hadn't noticed the missing one. Marcus looked back at the tag in his hand and realized it was a duplicate. Emergency issue, just like the one he wore after his second injury. He reached into his own shirt, pulled out his own tag, compared the weight, the texture. Identical. He closed his eyes. He knew what to do. He stood up. "Eli, stay here."
The boy nodded, wide-eyed. Marcus walked 2 steps and crouched beside her row. "Ma'am," he said, voice gentle. Nyasha turned, slowly. No alarm, just recognition of a certain tone, a military tone. Measured, calm, respectful. He held out the dog tag. "You dropped this." She took it with a nod. Their eyes locked for one breath, no longer. He stood to leave, but before he did, he said 5 words, quiet, but full of weight. "I served. I remember K7. Nyasha didn't respond, didn't need to. Her eyes said enough. Marcus returned to his seat, sat in silence. For a moment he debated, then opened his phone. No photos, no social posts,
just a private veterans forum. He typed, "There's someone alive from K7. Confirmed visual. Seat 25A. Ascendair, Flight 288. He hit send, then deleted it. The message would travel, but the evidence would vanish, just like K7 was meant to. Still, it was out there now. Behind him, Nyasha sat still. Her left hand held the bouquet, her right hand gripped the crutch, and for the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a woman with one leg, not as a problem to be moved, but as a soldier who came back, whether they were ready to face that or not. It began like most things do, with doubt. Not denial, just hesitation. That moment where something inside you whispers, "No way," even when your eyes are screaming, "Yes." Marcus Clay returned to his seat, but he didn't sit back the same way. He sat straighter, stiffer, like he was back in uniform again. He didn't speak to his son, didn't type again, didn't post. He just waited. In row 22, a middle-aged woman with graying braids caught his eyes. She looked down at Nyasha, then back at Marcus. He nodded once. That was enough. She opened her phone, typed a message, then erased it. Instead, she leaned toward the woman next to her. "She's from K7, she whispered.
It meant nothing to the other woman. Yet somehow, the way it was said, low, reverent, like a confession, made it stick. A few rows up, a teenage boy with noise-canceling headphones glanced behind him. He saw Marcus, the veteran's jacket, the posture. He followed his gaze to Nyasha, then to the wooden crutch, then to the tag. He didn't recognize K7, but he felt it meant something. And so it began. Not viral in the digital sense. No hashtags, no retweets. Just a chain of whispered realization, one row at a time. She's military, special unit classified, lost in action, but she's alive. Flight attendants noticed. One of them, the younger woman who had asked Nyasha to move, paused mid-service. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the metal coffee pod. She turned to her senior attendant and whispered, "Seat 25A, the woman, she's..." The senior attendant had seen enough. She didn't ask for proof. She just nodded. She walked to the cockpit, said nothing more than a line that would stay with the captain forever. "You might want to know, there's someone in 25A who wasn't supposed to come home." Back in the cabin, passengers began adjusting their posture. Phones were lowered, screens dimmed, eyes softened. A man who had scoffed earlier now shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A young woman who had been live streaming the first-class incident looked down at her phone, then locked the screen. No upload, no caption, just quiet. In seat 25A, Nyasha felt it. She didn't turn, didn't smile, didn't even move, but something had shifted in the air. The tension that once wrapped around her like barbed wire had begun to unravel, thread by thread. A soft voice behind her spoke, barely a whisper. "Thank you." She didn't respond. Not because she didn't hear, because if she opened her mouth, she wasn't sure what would come out. Gratitude? Tears? Nothing. Sometimes silence was the only language veterans had left. Up in first class, Richard Wexler remained unaware, still sipping, still scrolling, but passengers around him had begun looking back, not at Nyasha, but at themselves. And that's what made it powerful. This wasn't about a viral story or a headline. It was about people quietly realizing they had misjudged greatness. No one stood yet, no one clapped, but somewhere between row 12 and row 30, someone whispered a truth louder than any microphone. That woman came back from the dead, and we asked her to move. And now,
Now the whole plane was sitting a little straighter, a little quieter, as if they were on sacred ground 35,000 feet in the air.
For a while, no one moved. Not because they didn't care, because they didn't know how. There are moments in life where emotion hits so hard, so unexpectedly, that the body lags behind the soul. This was one of those moments. Row by row, the whispers had circled the cabin like wind beneath a storm. Now, it was still. Too still. Until one person stood. Seat 19D, a woman in her 70s, white hair pulled into a neat bun, cardigan wrapped tightly across her chest. She didn't look strong, but strength isn't always muscle. She stood slowly, almost cautiously, like rising for something sacred. Then she turned, not toward the front of the plane, toward the back, toward Nyasha. Her hands came together in front of her chest. She bowed, not deep, but deliberate. A single, silent movement that said, "I see you, I honor you." No applause, no gasp, just recognition. Passengers nearby noticed. Their necks turned like sunflowers tracking light. A second figure stood, seat 17A, a young man in military fatigues, barely 20, eyes red with something too deep for his age. He removed his cap, held it to his chest, didn't say a word. Then, row 15C, an Asian American woman in a business suit. She placed her laptop aside, stood, and bowed her head. Row 14B, a middle-aged Latino father with a sleeping toddler leaned gently aside, stood as quietly as he could, and faced the aisle. It wasn't coordinated. It wasn't organized. But like water finding its level, respect moved naturally. By the time it reached the cockpit, the pilot had turned to the co-pilot. "Pause the cabin service," he said. "Why?" "Because something real is happening back there." And it was. By row 10, a teenage girl in a hoodie stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do with her hands. By row 8, a businessman who had once side-eyed Nyasha was now standing with his head bowed. By row 5, the entire row was on their feet. In row 25A, Nyasha sat frozen. At first, she thought they were preparing to disembark, that maybe something mechanical had happened. But then she saw it. Row by row, from front to back, they were standing. For her. No one called her name, no one made a speech, but somehow they all knew. Her bouquet sat in her lap, petals trembling with her breath. Her crutch leaned against her leg. And her dog tag, that forgotten stamped piece of silver, reflected just enough light to seem alive. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she slowly turned her head, left to right, saw them, all of them, and for the first time on this flight, she allowed herself to feel seen, not judged, not pitied, honored. Behind her, Marcus Clay remained seated. He didn't need to stand. He had already saluted. Beside her, a child's voice whispered, not loud, not performative. "You're brave." Nyasha turned, smiled, and whispered back, "So are you."
It wasn't thunderous. It wasn't trending. No hashtags, no camera flashes. Just a plane full of people, finally realizing who they had asked to move. And this time, no one was telling her where to sit. In seat 2C, Richard Wexler sat alone. The aisle beside him was empty, the space unnaturally quiet for a man so used to filling rooms with his presence. He had leaned back earlier, arms crossed, eyes half closed, in the universal posture of power. But now he sat forward, straight-backed, still, and slowly, watching. From his seat near the front, he had a full view down the aisle. 1,000 small movements unfolding like a slow wave. Heads bowed, caps removed, eyes wet. No one had spoken his name. No one pointed at him. But he knew.
This wasn't just about Nyasha. This was about him and people like him who had forgotten that money doesn't make you honorable. Earlier, his smirk had been loud. Now the silence around him roared. He reached for his drink, but stopped mid-motion. The glass trembled slightly in his fingers. He glanced across the aisle, where Nyasha once sat, only a few feet away, and for a moment he saw the scene again. That crutch, that scarf, that tag. He hadn't noticed the weight back then, hadn't seen the scars beneath the silence, hadn't cared to ask. Now he couldn't look away. Passengers around him remained standing. A woman nearby wiped her eyes. A man farther down the cabin sniffled quietly. Richard cleared his throat, not to speak, but to hold back something rising in his chest. Not guilt, exactly. Not yet. Just realization. He reached up, removed his glasses, laid them on the tray table. Then, with no announcement, no gesture, no permission, he stood. It wasn't a proud movement. It wasn't dramatic. Just human. He adjusted his cuffs, straightened his tie, and bowed his head. Not deeply, but enough. Enough to say, I was wrong. Enough to say, she mattered. Enough to say, I'm not the biggest man in this room. No one clapped, no one cheered, but people noticed. A flight attendant paused mid-service and lowered her gaze. The pilot, notified from the cabin camera, said only, "Let it ride." Nyasha, seated far in the back, did not see him. She didn't need to. Some humility does not need to be witnessed to be real. But Marcus Clay saw. He turned his head slightly, looked up the aisle, met Richard's eyes from across the cabin. For a second, Richard looked like he might speak. Marcus simply gave a single nod. Nothing more. No forgiveness. No judgment.
Just acknowledgement. And that, in that sacred moment, was enough. When Richard sat back down, he didn't recline. He didn't order another drink. He just sat. Hands folded, eyes fixed on the seat in front of him.
Just her, and the crutch, and the weight of memory. She stopped at a section unmarked by individual names. Only one large plaque. Unit K7, Brothers in Silence. Lost, not forgotten. Nyasha knelt, slow and deliberate. Her fingers brushed the nameplate, not to clean it, to feel it. She placed the bouquet of white flowers beneath it. A single petal fell onto the stone. It stuck, motionless in the breeze. She reached into her coat, removed her dog tag, held it in her palm, then kissed it gently and placed it alongside the flowers. She whispered, "I walked for you." No one heard, but if anyone had, they would have heard the voice of someone who never asked to be saluted, only to be remembered. Some stories don't belong on the news. They aren't made for headlines, hashtags, or applause. They live in shadows, in scars, in silence. This was one of them. Nyasha Okoro never made the papers. No one tracked her cab from the airport, no interviews, no welcome home banners. She left Arlington just as she arrived, alone, on her own terms. The flowers she left at the memorial stayed there for 2 days before the wind scattered their petals like white ash across the graves. The dog tag remained, untouched, unclaimed. And if you were to visit that plot today, you'd see no name, but you'd feel something. Like the air's just a little heavier. Back on Ascend Air Flight 288, no footage went viral. No passenger tried to sell the story. No one wanted likes, because this was bigger than clicks. It became something more rare in this world, a memory shared by strangers and held sacred. The passengers never forgot her. The boy who stared up at her from the aisle now writes essays about honor. The teenage girl in the hoodie tattooed a small wooden crutch on her wrist. The businessman who once scoffed has since donated yearly to wounded veteran programs, anonymously. Even Richard Wexler changed. No, he didn't start a foundation, didn't become a new man, but at least once a year, on Veterans Day, he turns off his phone and takes a walk by himself. No driver, no entourage. He walks with his hands behind his back, and he remembers. Marcus Clay never spoke of it again, but at every reunion, he pauses at the moment of silence just a few seconds longer than everyone else. And the flight crew? They started a quiet ritual. Whenever they boarded a new flight on November 11th, someone would leave a white flower tucked behind seat 25A. No one explained why. No one needed to. As for Nyasha, no one knows where she lives now. She disappeared again, like mist in morning sun. Some say she changed her name. Some say she returned to Nigeria. Some say she walks the cemeteries at night, reading names no one visits anymore. No one can prove it.
But if you ever hear the sound of a wooden crutch tapping slowly on concrete, steady, quiet, unshakable, you might turn your head. And if you do, look closely, because some heroes don't come back for medals. They come back for those who didn't. And when they leave with dignity, not because they asked for it, but because the world finally remembered to give it. Not all heroes are buried in Arlington. Some walk among us, quietly, with scars that don't scream, with names no one remembers, and stories never told. Nyasha wasn't asking for attention. She didn't need an apology. She wasn't there to prove a point. She came for one reason, to remember the fallen. And yet, in doing so, she reminded all of us of something more powerful. That dignity isn't about titles or seating class or recognition. It's about how we treat people when we don't know who they are. In a world obsessed with viral justice and performative outrage, this story offers something rare. Real honor, real humility, real change, without spectacle. We live in a time where empathy is often filtered, edited, and cropped. But sometimes empathy just stands up. No microphone, no applause, just one bowed head at a time. This isn't just a story about a soldier. It's a story about all of us. How easy it is to judge, how hard it is to admit we were wrong, and how deeply it matters to get it right, even if it's late. So the next time you see someone walking quietly with pain, physical or otherwise, remember, they may be carrying a story that once shook the world, but they've chosen to carry it alone. If this story moved you even a little, pause, take a breath, and ask yourself, how many Nyashas have we passed by this week without ever looking twice? Tell us in the comments, have you ever misjudged someone
only to find out later they were carrying something extraordinary? We want to hear your thoughts. Share this story with someone who believes in quiet strength. Like if it made you feel something. Subscribe if you believe stories like this should never be forgotten. And remember, sometimes the most powerful people on the plane aren't the ones in first class.